Well, it's Friday, so it's time for another installment in our walk through the Bible, one book, one verse at a time. So today we're looking at the book of 2 Samuel, and we said last week, and by the way, if you missed that video, you can see it here or maybe here. I'm never really sure where those links show up. But we talked about how the books 1 and 2 Samuel were actually one whole story, and how 1 Samuel introduces us to kind of the theme of the whole thing, actually the theme of the whole time of the kings, as Hannah talks about in her song, how God is the one that is in control, and he opposes the proud, but he exalts the humble, and how ultimately he will provide an anointed king to rule and to guide his people, a messianic king. And Samuel, the first Samuel, talks about the rise of Saul and then his subsequent fall due to his pride and his inability to respect God as king. And 1 Samuel ends with the rather grisly demise of Saul and his children. And so then 2 Samuel introduces us to David, who seems to be a different kind of king. He's the humble one that is being exalted. And it goes through his successes to solidify the kingdom as one nation and to build Jerusalem as the political center and then actually as the religious center as well, as he brings the Ark of the Covenant there too. And at that point, he actually wants to build a temple, to build a house for God. But God says to him, no, David, you don't build me a house, I build you a house. And this is where I think our key verse comes in. So this is 2 Samuel 7, verse 16. God says to David, says, your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. This is an amazing promise, or a covenant, that God makes with David that says, and there's no requirements on David's part to follow or to do anything. This is simply God saying, I will make this happen. Now, as the story progresses from that point, we see that David isn't as perfect as maybe we would have liked him or hoped him to be. He sees a woman bathing on the roof and decides he has to have her, takes her, sleeps with her, gets her pregnant, and then has her husband killed, and then takes her as his own into the kingdom, or into the kingship. Now, within that, he's also then confronted by the prophet. And one of the differences between what David does and what others do is not what they do, but how they respond. Once David is confronted, he humbles himself. He becomes apologetic. He's sorry for what he did, and he does try to make things right. And yet there are consequences to his actions, and you start to see a decline for him as well throughout the end of the book of Samuel, or 2 Samuel. Now, as the story progresses, we see this promise that is made by God to David to come to fruition, not in his own son, and we'll see that as we talk about Solomon, but after, in his descendants way in the future, in Jesus. This promise that was given that there would be an eternal king that would come, that comes in Jesus. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, and we'll see that story as we go along. And as always, if this has been helpful for you and you've thought through some of the ways in which this story continues, I'd encourage you to like this video, to subscribe, and maybe leave a comment on how surprising you have found certain parts of this story.